On the night of April 14, 1912, while the RMS Titanic was 2 hours away from the bottom of the North Atlantic, first-class passengers were finishing an 11-course dinner that included French ice cream, peaches and chartreuse jelly, and a champagne palate cleanser, served between the fish and the meat. 2 decks below them, steerage passengers were eating boiled potatoes and salt herring off tin plates, and sleeping 6 to a cabin. The same ship, the same iceberg. Completely different last meals. Hi, my name is Carter, and this is Retro USA Chronicles. Number 25. First class. Oysters on the half shell. The last dinner served in the first-class dining saloon on the Titanic began at 7 o'clock in the evening on April 14, 1912, and it started the way every serious Edwardian dinner started. With oysters. Cold, briny, freshly shucked oysters served on beds of crushed ice with lemon wedges and mignonette sauce. Eaten with small silver forks by men in white tie and women in evening gowns worth more than a steerage passenger's entire life savings. Oysters in 1912 were not the luxury item they are today. They were fashionable, yes, but they were also simply how dinner began at this level of society. You did not question the oysters. The oysters were simply there, gleaming and cold, while outside the portholes the North Atlantic slid past in the dark. Nobody at that table was thinking about icebergs. They were thinking about what came next. Number 24. First class. Consomme Olga. After the oysters came the soup course, and the Titanic's first-class kitchen sent out Consomme Olga. A crystal-clear beef broth, clarified to the point of transparency through a laborious process involving ground meat, egg whites, and hours of careful skimming. Tiny slivers of sturgeon and vegetables floated in the bowl. It sounds simple. It was anything but. Making a proper consomme in a land kitchen in 1912 required serious technique. Making it on a moving ship, in a kitchen staffed by hundreds of crew members, serving 500 first-class passengers simultaneously, was a logistical achievement that deserves its own documentary. The head chef on the Titanic was a man named Charles Proctor, and he did not survive. His soup, however, is still remembered. Number 23. First-class poached salmon with mousseline sauce. The fish course arrived next. Poached salmon was served with mousseline sauce, a hollandaise lightened with whipped cream until it becomes something almost impossibly delicate. Rich but airy, bright with lemon and butter, yet somehow not heavy. Fresh salmon on a transatlantic crossing in April of 1912 meant the Titanic's kitchen was working through refrigerated stores loaded in Southampton and Queenstown. The fish had been aboard for 4 days. The fact that it was still being served poached rather than heavily sauced tells you something about the quality of the cold storage on that ship. The Titanic had refrigeration technology that most hotels ashore could not match. The salmon was perfect. Everything was perfect. That is the part that stays with you. Number 22. First-class filet mignon Lily. Now we are getting into the serious business of the evening. Filet mignon Lily was a tenderloin steak topped with a slice of foie gras, sitting on an artichoke heart, finished with a Perrigo sauce made from Madeira wine and black truffles. If you are keeping track at home, that is beef, goose liver, and truffles on the same fork at the same meal on a ship. Passenger Archibald Gracie, one of the survivors, later wrote that the dinner was a feast fit for kings and that no Roman emperor ever dined in greater luxury. He was not exaggerating. He was accurately describing a Tuesday night in first class on the Titanic. The ship hit the iceberg at 11:40 at night. That dinner had ended less than 2 hours earlier. Number 21. First class roast duckling with applesauce. The roast course offered passengers a choice, and one of those choices was roast duckling served with applesauce and a side of Siamese potatoes. Those were essentially fondant potatoes, cooked in butter until the outside formed a golden crust and the inside melted like cream. What strikes you when you read the full first-class menu is the sheer volume of it. We are at course 5, And there are 6 more to go. Edwardian dining at this level was not about hunger. It was about endurance. It was a performance of wealth conducted with silverware. The passengers who sat through all 11 courses that night were people who had been performing wealth their entire lives. Some of them were the richest human beings on the planet, and in approximately 3 hours, the ocean would take their silverware, their trunks, their jewels, and for many of them, their lives. Number 20. First class, lamb with mint sauce. Alongside the duckling came lamb, roasted and served with mint sauce in the classic English style. Simple, elegant, traditional. The kind of dish that showed up on every serious English table in 1912, whether you were dining in Mayfair or the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There is something almost unbearably ordinary about a plate of lamb with mint sauce. It is Sunday dinner food. It is the thing your grandmother made. The fact that it appeared on what would become the most famous last meal in maritime history makes it feel simultaneously completely normal and devastating. Somebody at that table took a bite of lamb and thought nothing of it. That is the part I cannot get past. Number 19. First class, punch romaine. Here the menu does something modern diners would find genuinely strange. Between the roast course and the next course, the kitchen sent out punch romaine. Not a drink in the cocktail sense. An intermezzo, a palate cleanser made from frozen lemon and orange sherbet spiked with champagne and white rum, served in a tall glass, and intended to reset your taste buds between the heavy roast meat and whatever was coming next. Punch romaine had been fashionable on luxury liners since the 1890s, and the Titanic's kitchen made it exactly right. Cold, sharp, slightly boozy, over in 3 or 4 bites. First-class survivor Lady Duff Gordon mentioned it specifically in later accounts. She remembered it because it was delicious. She did not mention that 2 hours after she ate it, she would be in a lifeboat. Memory is funny that way. After the palate cleanser came the cold dish course, and one of the offerings was Waldorf pudding, not to be confused with Waldorf salad, which is apples, walnuts, and celery and mayonnaise, and was also on the Titanic's first-class menu earlier in the voyage. Waldorf pudding was a molded dessert of layered cream, fruit, and sponge cake, chilled and set overnight, and plated with architectural precision. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, which had invented both dishes, was one of the most famous addresses in America in 1912. Naming your pudding after it was the equivalent of branding your product with the most powerful luxury label available. First-class passengers ate it and felt correctly that they were receiving the finest things the world had to offer. They were right. It was just that the world, in this particular case, had approximately 90 minutes left. Number 17. First class, eclair and peaches in chartreuse jelly. The dessert course offered eclairs alongside peaches suspended in chartreuse jelly. Chartreuse is a French liqueur made by monks from 130 herbs and botanicals, and it turns the most extraordinary shade of yellow-green when set into gelatin. Peaches in chartreuse jelly looked almost glowing on the plate. I want you to stop and picture this for a moment. A waiter in a white jacket is carrying a plate of luminous green jelly with peaches inside it across a gilded dining room on the largest ship ever built, while the temperature outside drops toward freezing. And somewhere ahead in the dark, an iceberg is drifting into the ship's path. Nobody in that dining room knows. The peaches look beautiful, the jelly catches the light. The evening is going perfectly. Number 16. Second class, baked haddock with sharp sauce. Now we step down 2 decks and cross a line that in 1912 might as well have been a wall. Second class on the Titanic was not steerage. The distinction matters. Second class passengers paid between $13 and $23 for their crossing, roughly $300 to $500 in today's terms, and they ate in a proper dining saloon with linen tablecloths, printed menus, and multiple courses. Their April 14th dinner included baked haddock served with sharp sauce, a piquant condiment made from vinegar, mustard, and herbs that cut through the richness of the fish. Haddock was a respectable protein, a working person's fish, but prepared properly with a good sauce, it was a genuine meal. Second-class passengers on the Titanic ate better than most first-class passengers on competing ships. White Star Line advertised this proudly. They were not wrong. Number 15, second class, curried chicken and rice. The second class menu for April 14th also included curried chicken and rice. And I want to pause here because this is fascinating. Curry on a transatlantic ocean liner in 1912 reflected the enormous reach of the British Empire and the food traditions that traveled with it. British curry in 1912 bore almost no resemblance to what you would get in an Indian restaurant today. It was chicken in a mildly spiced sauce, thickened with flour and served over white rice. It was tame by modern standards, but in 1912 on the North Atlantic, it was considered somewhat adventurous, international, sophisticated. Second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley, a science teacher from London who survived, wrote extensively about the food in his account of the sinking. He described the second-class dining room as genuinely comfortable, and the food as better than he expected. He ate the curry. He got into a lifeboat. He lived to tell the story. The food in his account was good. Number 14, second class, ox brain with tomato sauce. And here is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the one that makes modern audiences genuinely stop scrolling. The second-class dinner menu for April 14th, 1912 included ox brain with tomato sauce. Brain, from an ox, served at dinner, on the Titanic. Now, before you recoil, understand that organ meat in 1912 was not poor people food. Brains, kidneys, sweetbreads, and tongue appeared on respectable middle-class menus across Britain and America without apology. Ox brain had a texture similar to scrambled eggs, rich and creamy, with a mild flavor that paired naturally with the acid of a tomato sauce. Second-class passengers who ordered it were not eating desperately. They were eating the way their parents had taught them, to waste nothing from an animal and to appreciate the cuts that required more preparation than a simple chop. The brain course on the Titanic is the single item that tells you more about the distance between 1912 and today than anything else on any of these menus. We have collectively forgotten that an entire category of food existed and was considered normal. Number 13, second class, cornbread and plum pudding. Second-class bread service included cornbread, which spoke to the American passengers aboard, who would have found the British yeast rolls unfamiliar. Dessert included plum pudding, not a pudding with plums in it despite the name. British plum pudding was a dense, dark, steamed cake made with dried fruit, suet, breadcrumbs, brown sugar, and enough brandy to make a grown man's eyes water. It was traditionally set alight at the table, which I genuinely cannot believe they were doing on a ship, but the records suggest they were. Plum pudding was the most British thing that has ever existed in the history of British things. It was heavy, it was dark, it was soaked in alcohol, and it tasted like Christmas even in April. Second-class passengers ate it with custard poured over the top. Some of them would be in lifeboats before midnight. Number 12, second class, spring lamb with mint sauce. Just as first class received their lamb, second class had their own version. Spring lamb with mint sauce and roasted potatoes, presented simply and cooked properly in a kitchen that was producing meals for 2 levels of passengers simultaneously. The Titanic's kitchen operation was split into sections, each serving a different class, but they shared the same provisions and in many cases the same quality of raw ingredient. What separated first class from second class was not always the ingredient. It was the preparation, the presentation, the china it arrived on, the number of courses surrounding it, and the room it was eaten in. The lamb was the same lamb. The distance between the dining rooms was the whole world. Number 11. Second-class sago soup. Second-class dinner began with sago soup, and if you are under the age of 50, you are probably asking what sago is. Sago is a starch extracted from the pith of tropical palm trees, processed into small pearls that look exactly like tapioca. Boiled into a clear broth with vegetables and seasoning, sago soup had a slightly gelatinous texture and a mild, comforting flavor. It was nursery food dressed up for the dinner table. Easy to digest, gentle on the stomach after days at sea, and entirely inoffensive. Nobody has ever written a passionate account of sago soup. Nobody has a sago soup memory that brings them to tears. But somebody ate a bowl of it on the Titanic on April 14, 1912, and then climbed into a lifeboat or did not, and the soup was the last warm thing they tasted. That matters. Number 10. Third-class oatmeal porridge. Now we go below. All the way below to the third-class dining saloon, where over 700 passengers ate from a menu that was nutritious, filling, adequate, and almost aggressively plain. Breakfast in third class on the Titanic was oatmeal porridge, not the kind with brown sugar and cream that first-class passengers received in their staterooms in the morning. This was institutional oatmeal, boiled in large quantities, served in bowls, eaten communally in a long dining room with bench seating. It stuck to your ribs. It gave you energy. It tasted like something you ate because you needed to eat and not for any other reason. Third-class passengers on the Titanic were overwhelmingly immigrants, Irish families leaving Queenstown, Scandinavians, Lebanese and Syrian passengers, and Eastern Europeans. They were headed to America with everything they owned packed into a single trunk, and they were eating oatmeal in the belly of a ship that was going to kill a disproportionate number of them before morning. The survival rate in third class was 24%. In first class, it was 62%. The oatmeal does not explain that. The locked gates and the insufficient lifeboat assignments explain that. But the oatmeal is where the story of third class begins. Number 9. Third class, salt herring and jacket potatoes. Third class dinner on April 14th included salt herring and jacket potatoes. Salted preserved herring was served alongside potatoes baked in their skins. For Irish and Scandinavian passengers aboard, this was essentially home cooking, familiar and filling, smelling of the sea in a way that was either comforting or nauseating depending on how the crossing had been treating your stomach. Salt herring was working-class food across Northern Europe and the British Isles going back centuries. It was protein that traveled without refrigeration, packed in barrels of brine, the same way salt pork was packed for American frontier families. On the Titanic, it arrived on the plate already soaked and rinsed, served alongside a potato that had been baked until the skin crisped and the inside turned floury and soft. Here's the thing about jacket potatoes that I find impossible to move past. A jacket potato is just a potato. It costs almost nothing. It requires almost no skill. And there is something about eating a baked potato in the middle of the ocean at night that is one of the most honestly human things I can imagine. These were real people eating real food. And they had no idea that in a few hours, the ocean would be inside the ship. Number 8. Third class, bread, butter, and marmalade. Every morning in third class, passengers received bread and marmalade. White bread, the slightly sweet commercial kind that was considered a step up from the rough dark bread most emigrant passengers had eaten at home. A pat of butter, a spoonful of orange marmalade from institutional jars. It was breakfast. It was adequate. It was the same thing every single day. For many third-class passengers, white bread and marmalade represented something. It represented the ship's investment in them as passengers rather than cargo. The White Star Line had a financial incentive to keep emigrant passengers fed and healthy enough to pass American immigration inspections at Ellis Island. A passenger who arrived sick or malnourished was a liability. So they fed them. Not generously, but they fed them. Bread and marmalade every morning was the minimum the company could offer, and still call it hospitality. Number 7. Third-class rice soup. Third-class meals typically began with soup, and one of the soups served during the voyage was rice soup. Rice boiled in broth until the grains swelled and broke down slightly, thickening the liquid into something between a soup and a porridge. Salt, maybe a few vegetables. No cream, no garnish. No serving it in a clear crystal bowl to show off its transparency like the first-class consommé. Rice soup appeared on third-class menus because it was cheap, filling, and could be stretched to feed hundreds of passengers from a single large pot. It was also deeply familiar to the Lebanese, Syrian, and Eastern European passengers aboard, for whom rice and broth were everyday food rather than something exotic. There was no pretense about rice soup. It was fuel, and everyone eating it knew it. Number 6. Third class, boiled potatoes. Boiled potatoes appeared at dinner in third class as a standard side, and for Irish passengers especially, the potato was not a side dish. It was a statement. The Irish potato famine had ended less than 60 years before the Titanic sailed. The grandparents of passengers aboard third class had survived it or had not. The potato that killed a generation of Irish people was the same potato that fed their grandchildren on the ship to America. I am not going to make a joke here. I was going to. I had one ready. But the boiled potato on the Titanic third-class menu is one of those historical details that hits you in a specific way if you know the context. And now you do. Number 5. Third class, cabin biscuits and cheese. At the end of third-class meals, passengers received cabin biscuits and cheese. Cabin biscuits were the Edwardian era's version of a cracker. Dry, plain, slightly salted, designed to be eaten with cheese or spread. The cheese alongside them was a firm, mild variety, nothing aged or complex. The combination provided protein and a little fat at the end of a meal that had been heavy on starch. What strikes me about cabin biscuits is how recognizable they are. You can still buy essentially this product in any grocery store. The packaging has changed. The branding has changed. The biscuit is more or less identical, and passengers on the Titanic were eating it. In 1912, sitting in a long dining room below the waterline, eating crackers and cheese, headed for New York, completely unaware that the ship they were on had roughly 4 hours left before it broke apart and went to the bottom of the ocean. Number 4. The band's last meal. The 8 musicians who played on the Titanic were not first-class passengers. They were contracted entertainers, hired by an agency and paid to perform in the first and second-class public rooms throughout the crossing. Their employment classification put them in a peculiar position aboard the ship. They ate in second class. They performed in first class. They bunked in crew-adjacent quarters. They existed in the space between. On the night of April 14th, the band ate second-class dinner before taking up their instruments for the evening's entertainment. Then, after the ship struck the iceberg, while officers organized the loading of lifeboats and passengers milled in confusion on the deck, bandleader Wallace Hartley gathered his musicians, and they began to play. They played on the deck in the cold for more than 2 hours. They played ragtime to keep people calm. They played hymns at the end. Not one of them got into a lifeboat. All 8 died. The last meal they ate was second-class dinner on the Titanic, baked haddock, curried chicken, and plum pudding. Then they went upstairs and played music while the ship sank. It is one of the most extraordinary things any group of human beings has ever done, and they did it on a full stomach. Number 3. The captain's final dinner. Captain Edward John Smith, 62 years old with 40 years at sea, was on his retirement voyage. The Titanic was meant to be his last command before he stepped down from the White Star Line and went home to his wife and daughter in Southampton. He did not make it home. On the night of April 14th, Captain Smith was the guest of honor at a private dinner hosted in the A la carte restaurant, the Titanic's premium dining venue that operated separately from the main first-class saloon and required an additional surcharge. The host was George Widener, one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia, whose family had made their fortune in streetcar lines. The guest list included some of the most powerful people aboard. They ate from the full a la carte menu. This was a level above first-class dining. Private tables, individual service, dishes ordered a la carte rather than from a fixed menu. Captain Smith reportedly ate well, excused himself around 9 in the evening, and went to the bridge. He was on the bridge when the iceberg was struck. His body was never recovered. What he ordered for dinner that night was not recorded, but the wine list from the a la carte restaurant survived in the White Star Line's shore records, and it included champagne, Bordeaux, and hock served at the correct temperatures. The captain's last meal was a fine one. He had earned it. Number 2. What the crew ate. 890 crew members worked aboard the Titanic, and almost nobody ever asks what they ate. There were stokers who shoveled coal into the furnaces 16 hours a day, stewards who carried 11-course dinners from the kitchen to the first-class dining saloon without spilling a drop, laundresses who processed hundreds of pounds of linen daily, and dishwashers, engineers, carpenters, and lookouts. Crew ate from a separate galley and received rations that were filling rather than elegant. Stewed meat, potatoes, bread, basic soups, and beans. It was the same kind of institutional cooking that fed armies, workhouses, and hospital wards across Britain in 1912. Enough calories to sustain physical labor. Nothing more. The crew survival rate was 24%, the same as third-class passengers. Many crew members gave their lifeboat seats to passengers. Others were simply trapped below decks when the flooding began. The stokers who kept the engines running stayed at their posts long after it was clear the ship was lost, maintaining power so the lights stayed on and the wireless kept transmitting. Their last meal was stewed meat and potatoes, eaten in a mess hall below the waterline, and they ate it without knowing it would be their last. Number 1. The midnight buffet that was never finished. And here is the one that I cannot stop thinking about. I mean that literally. I have lost sleep over this one. Every night on the Titanic, the first-class kitchen prepared a midnight buffet. Cold cuts, smoked salmon, deviled kidneys, cold roasted chicken, oyster patties, petits fours. A full spread was laid out at midnight for passengers who had spent the evening in the smoking room or at private dinner parties that ran until 11. On the night of April 14th, 1912, that buffet was prepared. The tables were laid. The food was set out. The cold chicken glistened under the electric lights. The salmon was sliced thin and arranged on platters with the kind of care that only someone who truly takes pride in their work produces. At 11:40, the iceberg struck. The impact was so gentle that passengers sleeping in their cabins did not feel it. The midnight buffet was never touched. It sat there in the empty dining room while the band played on deck in the freezing air, and the boat began its slow, quiet descent into the North Atlantic. The Titanic sank at 2:20 in the morning. It took the buffet with it. The chicken, the salmon, the oyster patties. All of it now sits 2.5 miles below the surface inside a dining room that has not been opened since 1912. Somebody prepared that food. Somebody arranged those platters because their job was to feed people, and they were good at their job. The food was ready. The people just did not come. The Titanic is remembered as a disaster and a love story. But it is also a story about dinner, about the last ordinary thing people did before the extraordinary thing happened. They ate. First class, third class, crew and the captain. They sat down, ate their meal, and had no idea. That is the part that gets me every single time. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.